The security guard didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just slid the clipboard closer, like I was the one who'd made a simple mistake. The lobby of Caldwell Tower smelled like lemon cleaner and cold air conditioning. Polished stone under my boots. A quiet fountain in the corner. The kind of place built to make people whisper without being told. He tapped a single line with his pen. "Family is upstairs," he said. "You're not on the list." I leaned in. I stared at the paper like it might change if I looked hard enough. Names in neat black print. Vanessa Caldwell, Ethan Caldwell, board members. A pastor, a few men from the country club, even the photographer's assistant. Not mine. Behind the front desk, the badge reader gave a soft green blink for the next person in line. For me, it stayed dark. No beep, no error message, just nothing. Like the building didn't recognize my existence. Vanessa walked past the glass doors a moment later, heels clicking, black coat fitted perfectly. She didn't stop. She didn't even glance my way. But the corner of her mouth lifted, just enough to let me know it wasn't an oversight. I felt my throat tighten, not from grief, from clarity. This had been decided before I ever parked my truck. My name is Mara Bennett, and that was the first time I understood they planned to bury me while my father was still above ground. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace in your own family, stay with me a little longer. My mother died on a Tuesday evening in our kitchen. There was soup on the stove, chicken and rice, the kind she made when one of us had a cold. I remember the smell more than the sound. I remember the way the house felt too bright for what had just happened, the overhead light humming, the refrigerator clicking on like nothing in the world had changed. I was 10. My father stood in the hallway with the phone pressed against his ear, saying words like, "Ambulance," and, "Yes, she just collapsed." His voice was steady. Too steady, like he was already practicing being the strong one. The soup burned. No one turned off the stove. That was the first time I understood something important about my father. When something breaks, he moves forward. He doesn't look at the pieces. 6 months later, Vanessa moved into the house. She didn't arrive with drama. No yelling. No grand announcement. Just boxes. Matching luggage. A white SUV in the driveway that didn't belong there yet. She walked through the front door like she'd been invited to host a dinner party. "I know this is hard," she said to me once, standing in what used to be my mother's sewing room. "But your father needs stability." Stability. That word stuck. Within a year, the sewing room became a nursery for Ethan. My room shifted down the hall because it made more sense with the layout. My mother's framed photos disappeared from the living room mantel. Not all at once, just one here, one there, replaced by neutral landscapes and glossy charity gala shots. No one asked me if I noticed. At Thanksgiving that year, Vanessa sat at the head of the table. My father is at her right. Ethan is in a high chair between them. I ended up at the far end with a cousin I barely knew. "Ethan's going to have your father's business mind," Vanessa said, loud enough for the whole table. You can tell. He was 3. I passed the mashed potatoes and kept my mouth shut. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter. I was older. I didn't need the attention. It always matters. By the time I turned 16, Caldwell Industrial had already started expanding into new markets. Steel distribution, construction supply chains. My father was on the cover of a regional business magazine. Self-made titan of the Midwest. At school, teachers would ask if I was proud. I would nod. At home, I learned something different. Pride in our family came with conditions. Ethan got applause for effort. I had expectations. When he forgot homework, Vanessa would laugh. "He's creative. He thinks differently." When I brought home straight A's, my father would glance at the report card and say, "That's what I expect from you." Expectation isn't praise. It's pressure with a smile. The summer I turned 18, I asked if I could intern at the company. Vanessa hesitated before my father answered. "She'll start in operations," he said finally. "If she's serious." "Serious? I spent that summer on the factory floor." The heat in July wrapped around your lungs. The sound of metal being cut and shaped rang in your ears, even after you clocked out. I wore steel-toe boots and ear protection. No one there called me Sir's daughter. They called me Mara, sometimes Kid. I liked that better. I learned how steel moved through the building, where delays happened, which vendors were reliable, which invoices didn't make sense. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time I saw the company from the inside out. And once you see how something really works, you can't unsee it. At home, though, the dynamic never shifted. One Christmas morning, Ethan got a brand new sports car, bright red, a ribbon stretched across the hood in the driveway. Vanessa filmed it on her phone while he shouted and hugged my father. I got a leather planner. "It'll help you stay organised," Vanessa said gently. I thanked her. That was the day I learned love in my family had conditions. Years later, those conditions would come with a price tag. By the time I was 24, I was working full-time at Caldwell Industrial. Not in a corner office, in operations, auditing shipments, reviewing vendor contracts, staying late when trucks ran behind schedule. Ethan was studying international business abroad. Monaco one semester, Milan the next. His photos showed yachts and rooftop bars. Vanessa shared them online with captions about raising a global leader. At the plant, no one talked about yachts. They talked about steel prices and overtime, and whose kid had the flu. I preferred that. One night, I stayed late to review quarterly expense reports. Nothing dramatic, just numbers, columns, vendor payments, consulting fees that didn't line up with any actual consulting. The name Blackridge Advisory appeared again and again, Delaware-based, vague descriptions, high dollar amounts, 38 million over 3 years. I printed the reports, not because I planned anything big, just because something in my stomach felt tight. When I brought the stack to my father the next morning, he didn't look at the top page. Vanessa was already in his office. "That's restricted access, Mara," she said before he spoke. "You shouldn't be digging around in areas you don't understand." "I understand numbers," I said. My voice was steady. "And these don't make sense." My father leaned back in his chair. He didn't reach for the file. "Are you accusing someone?" he asked. "I'm asking you to look." Vanessa placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "She's under a lot of pressure. Maybe she's overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. The word felt familiar. He finally picked up the first page. His eyes skimmed it for less than 5 seconds before he set it down. "You accessed restricted financials," he said. "That's a breach of protocol." "It's the company," I replied. "It's our company." His jaw tightened. "It's my company." That was the first crack. The second came when he stood up. I won't describe the slap in detail. I don't need to. It wasn't violent. It wasn't cinematic. It was quick, controlled, almost administrative. "You are no longer my daughter in this building," he said quietly. "Security will escort you out." The elevator ride down felt longer than any drive I'd taken in my life. Employees avoided my eyes. The lobby smelled like polished stone and expensive coffee. I walked out carrying a box with my nameplate inside. That was the last day I used the name Caldwell professionally. I told myself I didn't need their approval. I didn't realize I was going to need their truth. I left Detroit 2 weeks after that. No dramatic goodbye, no slammed doors. I packed my clothes, the leather planner, and the printed copies of those expense reports. I didn't know why I kept them. Maybe because paper feels heavier than memory, harder to dismiss. Maine wasn't a fresh start. It was just quieter. I rented a small metal building near the water and turned it into a fabrication shop. The first winter, the pipes froze twice. The second year, I broke even. By the third, I had 3 steady contracts building custom marine brackets and structural frames for local boatyards. People there didn't care whose daughter I was. They cared whether I showed up on time. I liked that math better. Owen came into my life somewhere between welding sparks and coffee refills at the diner down the road. He's a marine engineer. Quiet, steady. The kind of man who fixes things before they become emergencies. He never asked about Detroit unless I brought it up. I didn't. When the mail came with the Caldwell logo on the envelope once, annual shareholder updates still listing me as a minor holding beneficiary, I tossed it unopened into a drawer. I'd already decided I wasn't fighting for scraps. For 8 years, I didn't hear much from my father. A Christmas card for 1 year, signed in blue ink. Just his name, no note. Once I saw him on a business news clip. His hair is thinner, his shoulders are narrower. Vanessa stood behind him like a frame. Ethan's name started appearing in press releases. Vice President of Strategic Growth, a title that sounded important and vague at the same time. I told myself I was free. Then the call came. It was 2:07 in the morning. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Hello? My voice was thick with sleep. Silence first, then breathing. Ragged, laboured. Mara. I sat up immediately. It had been years since I'd heard him say my name. Dad? They're medicating me, he said. The words were slow, like they were pushing through mud. More than necessary. My heart started pounding. Don't panic. Recognition. Where are you? I asked. Ravenwood, he replied. Listen carefully. There was a sound in the background. A door closing. Maybe footsteps. Find Thomas Riley, he whispered. The red envelope. Don't trust. The line cut. No goodbye. No explanation. I stared at the dark ceiling for a long time after that. Owen woke up halfway through and asked if everything was okay. I don't know, I told him. That was the truth. Ravenwood Estate sat outside Pittsburgh. Old stone house, gated driveway, more rooms than any family actually needs. It was Vanessa's dream home. A place fit for charity luncheons and political fundraisers. When I pulled up 3 days later, the driveway was full. Funeral cars, black coats, familiar faces pretending not to recognize me. Security stopped me at the gate. Private service, the guard said. Immediate family only. I am immediate family, I answered. He looked at his tablet, scrolled. I'm sorry, ma'am. Vanessa appeared before I could argue further. She stepped down the stone stairs in heels too sharp for mourning. You shouldn't have come, she said softly. Harold didn't want drama. Drama. He called me, I said. Her smile didn't move. In his condition, he was confused. Confused. Inside the house, I caught a glimpse of Ethan laughing too loudly with a group of board members. A live stream phone propped casually against a vase. Even grief, apparently, could be content. I stayed near the back of the room. I watched from a distance as they spoke about my father's legacy, how he built something lasting, how he valued loyalty. No one mentioned the red envelope. After the burial, there was a brief announcement. The official reading of the will would take place at Caldwell Tower in Detroit, corporate headquarters. That told me everything I needed to know. The reading was held in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the river. Long table. Bottled water lined up neatly. Vanessa on one side, Ethan beside her, 2 board members, the family attorney. Me at the far end. The attorney cleared his throat and began. The language was formal, predictable. Assets, holdings, distributions. When he reached my name, he didn't pause for long. Ms. Mara Bennett is not named as a beneficiary under this instrument. Instrument. That was the word he used. Vanessa folded her hands. He chose loyalty over blood, she said calmly. The room felt colder than the lobby downstairs. I didn't react immediately. I've learned not to. Instead, I asked a simple question.
What's the date on that document?
5 months ago, the attorney replied. 5 months ago. That was after the sedation changes. After Dr. Kaplan had been replaced. After Thomas Riley had been retired. Ethan leaned back in his chair and gave me a look I'd seen before. Half pity, half challenge. You really think you deserve the same as me? He said quietly. For what? There it was. Not jealousy. Not anger. Entitlement. I didn't answer him, because at that moment something inside me shifted. I wasn't trying to be included anymore. I was trying to understand the timing. 5 months ago, and 14 months before that, according to what little I knew of my father, he had still been sharp, still running meetings, still signing contracts. The numbers started lining up in my head. Sedation change, staff replacement, Thomas disappearing, the red envelope. They thought the will was the final word. I had a feeling it was only the draft. The first thing I did after that was reading. I didn't yell. It wasn't threaten. It was called Dr. Kaplan. He had been my father's physician for almost 15 years, a steady man, conservative, not the kind to overprescribe anything. His receptionist hesitated when I gave my name. He's not associated with the Caldwell case anymore, she said carefully. I'm not asking for association, I replied. I'm asking about a timeline. There was a pause, then a quiet transfer. Dr. Kaplan's voice sounded older than I remembered. They changed his medication plan, he said after I explained what I'd heard on the phone that night. I objected to the dosage increase. I was removed shortly after. Removed how? Contract terminated. New private medical team installed. The word installed stuck with me. Was he mentally competent 5 months ago? I asked. Another pause. On the days I examined him, he said slowly. Yes. On the days I examined him. I thanked him and hung up. That was the first piece. The second came from someone I hadn't thought about in years. Thomas Riley had been estate manager at Ravenwood long before Vanessa arrived. He wasn't a butler. He handled maintenance schedules, vendor contracts, property logistics. Quiet. Reliable. He also knew where everything was kept. His phone number was disconnected. His email bounced back. So I drove to his last known address in Ohio. Small house. Faded blue siding. A mailbox leaning slightly to one side. A neighbour, watering her plants, watched me from across the street. Are you looking for Tom? She asked. Yes. He left in a hurry, she said, a couple of weeks ago. Said something about needing space. Did he say where he was going? She shook her head, but he looked worried. Worried. I stood there a minute longer than necessary. He had been fired 1 week before my father died. According to Vanessa, it was retirement. Men who retire don't leave their lawn uncut. On the drive back to Maine, I replayed my father's voice in my head. Find Thomas Riley. The red envelope. The third piece didn't come from a person. It came from my bank. 2 days after the will reading, my business checking account was flagged for review. Funds temporarily frozen pending verification. I called the bank manager directly. There's been an alert tied to a related financial investigation, she explained carefully. Related to what? I asked. I'm not authorised to disclose. I knew that language. Somewhere, someone had linked my name to something messy. I called Daniel Ortiz that afternoon. We had worked together briefly at Caldwell Industrial. Forensic accountant. Detail-oriented to a fault. I need you to look at Blackridge Advisory, I told him. There was silence on the line. I thought you were out, he said. I am, I replied, but the money isn't. He agreed to review what he could access publicly. 3 days later, he called me back. Blackridge is still active, he said. Same structure. Same consulting funnel. Payments never stopped. Since when? Since you left. 38 million hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. Meanwhile, back in Detroit, the board announced an emergency vote. Official language. ensuring continuity of leadership following Mr. Caldwell's passing. Translation, cementing Vanessa as interim executive authority, with Ethan stepping into a more visible role.
I wasn't invited to the meeting.
I found out from a former plant supervisor who still texted me occasionally. They're moving fast, he wrote. Feels off. That made two of us. I drove back to Detroit the night before the vote. Caldwell Tower looked the same. Glass reflecting grey sky. Lobby smelling like lemon and money. This time, security didn't stop me. They just watched. I went straight to the floor that used to be mine. Operations. Most of the old faces were gone, replaced by polished suits who didn't know the difference between rolled steel and cold formed. One of the remaining supervisors pulled me aside. Careful, he said quietly. They've been telling people you're unstable. There it was again. Unstable. Vanessa didn't attack loudly. She suggested doubt. Just enough to make people step back. At the board meeting, I wasn't given a seat at the table. I stood near the wall. Vanessa spoke about preserving Harold's vision. Ethan nodded at the right moments. When the vote concluded, it was unanimous. Continuity secured. Afterward, Ethan approached me near the elevators. You keep showing up like you belong here, he said, almost amused. You don't. I held his gaze. I built half the systems in this building, I said. He smiled thinly. And we rebuilt them. That line landed harder than I expected. Rebuilt them. Erased me. I left before I said something emotional. Emotion would only help them. Outside, the wind off the river cut through my coat. I stood there looking up at the tower my father built from nothing, and I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't just about being cut out of a will. This was about being cut out of history. That night, Daniel sent another message. Found something, it read. Attached was a timestamp log from a corporate cloud backup system. 14 months ago. Video file uploaded from a private legal office in Cleveland. File name, HC__ecstasy_execution. File name, HC__execution. My pulse didn't work out. My pulse didn't work out. Trackly, my pulse didn't work out. File name, HC_execution. 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 File name, HC_execution. My pulse didn't work out. 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 File name, HC_execution. Video file uploaded from a private legal office in my pulse didn't spike. It steadied. Because that wasn't 5 months ago. It was 14. And if that video was what I thought it was, then the document read in that glass conference room wasn't final. It was convenient. I stared at the file name for a long time. They thought I was reacting emotionally. They thought I was wounded. What they didn't understand yet was that I was counting. I didn't open the video file right away. I forwarded it to Laura Mitchell first. Laura wasn't part of the Caldwell orbit. That was intentional. Cleveland-based estate attorney. Reputation for not being impressed by money. We met in her office 2 days later. Brick building. Fluorescent lights. A coffee pot that had clearly been there since the early 2000s. She watched the video once without speaking. On screen, my father looked older, yes. Thinner. But alert. He answered questions clearly, stated his name, the date, confirmed he understood the nature of the document. He signed. Laura rewound it and checked the timestamp, cross-referenced it with metadata Daniel had pulled from the cloud server. 14 months ago, she said. Executed in front of 2 independent witnesses. Not corporate counsel. Is it valid? I asked. If it's authentic and there's no revocation afterward that meets capacity standards, yes. Capacity standards. There was that word again. Laura leaned back in her chair. Will they read it 5 months ago? Do you have a copy? I have the summary from the meeting. I'll request the full instrument, she said calmly. If your father was heavily medicated at the time, that becomes relevant. Relevant? I liked that word better than unstable. That same afternoon, I received a certified letter at my shop in Maine. From Caldwell Industrial Holdings. It was a formal notice advising me to cease and desist from making defamatory claims regarding company leadership. Defamatory claims. I hadn't made any public statements. I called the number listed. The attorney on the other end spoke carefully, like every word had been weighed. We're aware you've been contacting former staff and vendors, he said. It would be unfortunate if that created reputational damage. Unfortunate? You're threatening me, I replied evenly. I'm advising you. I ended the call. They were nervous. Nervous people escalate. 2 days later, Thomas Riley finally called me. Private number. I don't have much time, he said immediately. His voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Where are you? I asked. Safe enough, he replied. Listen carefully. Your father had me retrieve a package from his study last winter. Said if anything happened, I was to keep it secure. The red envelope, I said. Yes. My heart didn't race. It narrowed. Where is it? I asked. Not in the house, he said. After they increased his medication, he got worried. He stitched it into the lining of his winter coat. Asked me to swap it before the cleaners came. I closed my eyes for a moment. Do you have it? I have it, Thomas said. But they've been asking about me. Who is they? Silence. Vanessa's people. That answered enough. We arranged to meet in a public place, a hardware store parking lot off the highway outside Cleveland. Mid-afternoon. Security cameras everywhere. Thomas looked older, more tired. He handed me a sealed envelope inside a plain grocery bag. I never opened it, he said. I know, I replied, because Thomas wasn't ambitious. He was loyal. That loyalty had cost him his job. When I opened the envelope later with Laura present, the room went very quiet. Inside were 3 things. A signed copy of the will executed 14 months ago. A handwritten letter in my father's uneven but unmistakable script. And a USB drive. The will named me primary beneficiary of the majority share in Caldwell Industrial. Vanessa was allocated a lifetime residence stipend. Ethan received a trust distribution, capped and conditional. The handwritten letter was short. Mara, if you are reading this, I didn't move fast enough. I let things drift. I was wrong about the numbers. I was wrong about you. H. No apology for the slap. No explanation. But acknowledgement. The USB drive contained something else entirely. An audio file. Vanessa's voice. Increase the dosage. He won't remember half of this tomorrow. A male voice responded, uncertain. That's not my call. It will be if you want to keep your position. The date stamp aligned with the 5-month document. Laura didn't look surprised. This is undue influence, she said quietly. Possibly elder abuse. I sat back in my chair. 8 years ago, I walked out of that building humiliated. Now I was sitting with paper and proof. I didn't feel victorious. I felt precise. We filed an emergency petition in Wayne County Probate Court the next morning. Motion to invalidate the later instrument. Motion to freeze asset transfers pending review. The response from Vanessa's camp was immediate. Press statement about grief-fueled allegations. Hints that I was estranged. Subtle references to long-standing emotional instability. The same pattern. Rewrite memory. Question credibility. Ethan made one mistake. He sent me a message. You're blowing this up for money you never earned. I read it twice. Then once more. He still believed this was about inheritance. He didn't understand that it had stopped being about money the night my father called at 2:07 a.m. The board tried to push through a restructuring before the court hearing. Rapid asset movement. Subsidiary adjustments. Daniel caught it. They're shifting liquidity, he said, trying to make it messy. Laura filed another motion. Injunction granted. For the first time, the company slowed. Not because Vanessa asked, because a judge ordered it. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Vanessa requested dismissal. Claimed harassment, claimed forgery, claimed confusion. But confusion doesn't create metadata. Confusion doesn't produce time-stamped videos. Confusion doesn't record itself on a USB drive. The night before the hearing, Ethan called me. Not a text, a call. You don't have to do this, he said. His tone wasn't angry. It was scary. It's already done, I replied. You're going to destroy everything. I looked out at my shop floor. Sparks from a late weld lit up the dark. No, I said. I'm just making sure it was built honestly. He hung up without another word. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the scapegoat. I felt like the audit. The hearing wasn't dramatic. It was fluorescent lighting and stiff chairs, and the low murmur of other families waiting their turn. Wayne County Probate Court smelled faintly of old carpet and copier toner. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. I sat at the petitioner's table with Laura to my right. Across the aisle, Vanessa wore a soft grey suit and a composed expression that would have fit at any charity luncheon in the Midwest. Ethan sat beside her, jaw tight, phone face down. When our case was called, I stood. Not because I felt small. Because it's what you do. Judge Emily Kessler was direct from the first sentence. We are here to address the validity of 2 testamentary instruments executed by the late Mr. Harold Caldwell, she said. Counsel, proceed. Vanessa's attorney went first. He framed me as estranged. Emotional, motivated by regret. Ms. Bennett has not been involved in the family for years, he said. Her sudden appearance coincides conveniently with the distribution of significant assets. I kept my hands folded. Laura stood slowly when it was her turn. Your Honour, she began, this case is not about estrangement. It is about capacity and undue influence. She submitted the 14-month-old will first. Video recording entered into evidence. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. There was my father, older, thinner, but clear. My name is Harold Caldwell, he said into the camera. I am of sound mind and executing this document voluntarily. He answered the attorney's questions without hesitation, confirmed he understood his assets, confirmed he was not under coercion. When the clip ended, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Vanessa's attorney stood again. That video predates the most recent will, he said. A testator may change his mind. Laura nodded. He may, she agreed, if he has capacity. She called Dr. Kaplan. He testified to my father's condition before he was removed. Stable, Alert, independent in decision-making. Then she submitted medical logs from the private team that replaced him. Dosage increases. Sedatives added. Dates aligning precisely with the execution of the later instrument. Vanessa's attorney objected. Judge Kessler overruled. The final piece was the audio file. Laura didn't introduce it theatrically. She simply said, "We have an additional recording relevant to the court's consideration." Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time when her own voice filled the room. "Increase the dosage. He won't remember half of this tomorrow." Silence followed. It wasn't explosive. No gasps, no shouting, just the sound of the air vent overhead. Vanessa's attorney attempted to argue context, editing, manipulation. But metadata doesn't argue. It timestamps. Judge Kessler leaned forward slightly. "Counsel," she said to Vanessa's attorney, "is there any evidence that Mr. Caldwell revoked the earlier instrument while demonstrably competent?" There wasn't. The 5-month will had been signed under sedation levels inconsistent with independent capacity. The prescribing physician had financial ties to a Caldwell-controlled entity. Paper trails don't scream, they stack. Ethan shifted beside his mother. I could see the calculation in his face. No remorse. Assessment. When the judge began her ruling, she spoke evenly. The court finds substantial evidence of undue influence surrounding the instrument dated 5 months prior to Mr. Caldwell's death, she said. Accordingly, that instrument is declared invalid. The air in my lungs felt different. The court further recognises the validity of the earlier will executed 14 months prior, supported by video documentation and independent witnesses. Invalid. Valid. 2 words. Years of tension condensed into syllables. Vanessa's shoulders straightened, but her hands gripped the edge of the table. "This is a mistake," she said under her breath. Judge Kessler continued, "In light of the audio evidence presented, this matter will be referred to the appropriate authorities for further review regarding potential financial misconduct and coercion." There it was. Not revenge. Consequence. Ethan stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She left. She didn't care." I looked at him for the first time during the hearing. "I cared about the numbers," I said quietly. "You should have too." The judge instructed him to sit. When the gavel came down, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Outside the courtroom, reporters had gathered. Word travels fast when legacy money is involved. Vanessa exited without speaking. Ethan followed, jaw set, avoiding cameras. Laura turned to me. "You understand what this means?" she said. I nodded. It meant control of the majority share. It meant board restructuring. It meant audits. It meant the story wasn't over. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the Detroit air felt colder than it had that morning. For 8 years, I had carried the image of myself walking out of Caldwell Tower with a cardboard box and a red mark on my cheek. Today, I walked down courthouse steps with a certified copy of a ruling in my hand. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. They thought the will was the final word. It turned out it was just evidence. I didn't go back to the tower that afternoon. I went to a diner 3 blocks from the courthouse. Same cracked vinyl booths. Same waitress who calls everyone, "Hun." I ordered coffee I didn't drink and spread the documents out in front of me like blueprints. Control on paper is not control in practice. The court had invalidated the 5-month will. The 14-month version stood. But companies don't shift because a gavel taps once. They shift because someone enforces it. Laura joined me 20 minutes later, coat still buttoned. "You have a majority share," she said, sliding into the booth. "But the board won't make it easy." "I don't expect it to be easy," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "What do you expect?" I looked down at the certified copy of the ruling. My father's name is printed in black ink. At the language that now placed me back inside the structure I'd once been pushed out of. "I expect resistance," I said, "and I expect paper." That night, Daniel sent over a preliminary forensic summary. The Blackridge funnel hadn't stopped after I left. It had grown. Consulting invoices tied to shell accounts, intercompany transfers disguised as advisory fees, not small mistakes. Patterns. We compiled everything into a single binder. Fraud trail, audio file transcript, medication timeline. Cloud metadata verification. I didn't feel angry assembling it. I felt organised. Vanessa issued a statement the next morning, calling the court's decision deeply disappointing and hinting at appeal. Ethan reposted it with a single line, "This isn't over." He was right. It wasn't, but not in the way he meant. We filed a motion to remove 6 board members pending independent audit review. Conflict of interest, failure of oversight. Breach of fiduciary duty. I authorised a third-party compliance firm to begin reviewing vendor contracts. I sent formal notices to subsidiaries that all discretionary transfers were suspended until further investigation. No shouting, no public accusations. Just letters. They thought they'd cut me out for good. All they really did was give me permission to stop protecting them. For years I had kept quiet about what I found, about the slap, about the numbers that didn't add up. I told myself it was loyalty, it was fear. Paper doesn't get tired. It doesn't forget. It doesn't care about family dinner seating charts. They buried the truth in paperwork. Unfortunately for them, I read every line. The last thing I did before leaving Detroit was request access to the executive archives, historical contracts, early formation documents, my father's original incorporation filings. Because if someone is willing to manipulate one set of records, you check all of them. As I walked out of Caldwell Tower that evening, badge reactivated this time, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd stepped into a longer game. They believed the ruling settled it. I was just getting organised. I didn't sleep much the week after the ruling. Not from anxiety, from the quiet. When something loud finally stops, the silence feels heavier than the noise ever did. I was back in Maine, sitting at my kitchen table before sunrise. The house is still dark, coffee going cold in front of me. My shoulders felt tight in a way they hadn't during the hearing. Winning, if that's what you call it, doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath too long. Owen left early for the marina that morning. He kissed my forehead and didn't ask for updates. He knows I'll speak when I'm ready. 3 days later, I flew back to Pennsylvania. Ravenwood Estate looked smaller than I remembered. Same stone facade, same iron gates. But without the security detail and catered vehicles, it felt like a house pretending to be something else. I let myself in with the new access code. The air inside smelled like polished wood and dust that hadn't been disturbed in weeks. The HVAC hummed softly. Light filtered through the tall windows in thin stripes across the floor. It was legally mine now. It didn't feel like mine. I walked through the rooms slowly, past the dining table where Vanessa used to host fundraisers, past the study where my father once signed contracts that built half the Midwest. His workshop was behind the main house. Detached, brick, slightly colder. I hadn't been inside it since I was 23. The door creaked when I opened it. The smell hit me first. Oil, metal, old wood, not curated. Not polished, real. The workbench was still there, tools hanging in careful order, a pegboard with outlines drawn around each wrench and hammer. I ran my fingers across the surface. Dust clung to my skin. In the corner drawer of the bench, beneath a stack of yellowed schematics, I found a small welding hammer. The handle was worn smooth from years of use. My father's initials are carved faintly near the base. I remembered him teaching me how to hold it, how to strike without overcommitting. "Let the tool do the work," he'd said once. I sat down on the stool and held that hammer in both hands. He had protected this space, preserved it, left it untouched even when the rest of the house shifted around Vanessa's taste. But he hadn't protected me when it mattered most. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me still. I would trade the house, the shares, all of it, for one moment where my father chose me while he was alive. But I don't get to rewrite his choices. I only get to decide what I accept now. A few days later, one of the old plant foremen drove out to see me. Ray had worked under my father for 20 years. He stood awkwardly in the driveway, cap in hand. I should have said something back then, he admitted. About the numbers, about what you found. I nodded once. You didn't, I said.
No.
We stood there in the cool air between us. No grand apology, no sudden redemption. I'm glad you're back, he added quietly. I'm not back, I replied.
I'm just responsible now.
He understood that difference. Before leaving, I changed the locks on the main house. Not because I was afraid, because it was practical. Inside, I cleared one drawer in the kitchen. Threw out old mail. Kept a single photo of my father standing beside a shipment of raw steel from the early days. Before the galas. Before the speeches. In the workshop, I left everything exactly where it was. Some spaces don't need renovation. They need honesty. On my last night there, I sat alone at the long dining table. No place settings, no cameras. Just quiet. My phone buzzer. An unknown number. I let it ring once before answering. This is Mara. There was hesitation on the other end. We've located a secondary safety deposit box, registered under your father's name, the voice said. Your signature is listed as contingent access. Contingent. I looked down at the welding hammer still resting on the table beside me. I'll be there tomorrow, I said. After I hung up, I didn't feel dread. I felt alert. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for what they might take. I was paying attention to what was still there. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, the one who stayed quiet while decisions were made over your head, I see you. This story was never just about a will. It was about what people reveal when they think you won't push back. If any part of this feels familiar, subscribe and stay with me. Share this with someone who's been told to let it go just to keep the peace. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were me? I read every message. Sometimes the stories you share become the next one I tell.